This is Mindrolling. I'm Raghu, and I'm with Lily Cushman. And Lily's an old friend and has written a delightful book. First of all, welcome, Lily.
Thank you, Raghu. So nice to be here.
So delightful is one word to say about this book, but more appropriately, since it's about mantra, and it's called a little bit of mantras, an introduction to sacred sounds. And since our mission here at Mindrolling, if we have one, is certainly to try and give us all methodology to get our lives a little bit more in balance. So certainly this particular practice that encompasses more than one practice, really, that there's many different avenues that people can pick in the mantra world.
Yeah.
They can be sung, they can be repeated, you can use rosary beads, right? Which is a mala in Hindi. So there's a few, you can write it. So there's different ways, yes, that it can happen. So first, though, what were you doing when you were a little guy and wondering what in the hell is this world? And you were out in the middle of the country. Tell us a little bit about how you came up through and what was the development of your story?
Yeah, well, I grew up in Boise, Idaho, and I was exposed kind of from an early age to a variety of different worlds because both my parents were seekers in different ways, and so I think like many people who come to these practices, I just got kind of curious from a young age about, what options were out there. And when I first went to college, I was really overwhelmed, and I was studying music in Boston, and it was a really kind of unhealthy culture, as many colleges are, and I was just kind of looking for a way to take care of myself. So I started working with a shaman who had been a teacher of my mother's from Idaho. And
you got all this. I mean, you had a nice start because your parents were into. I mean, that's unusual. I mean, that didn't happen to me and most people I know. So you had some grounding that there is a reality outside of what society and the norms are being dictated to me, and get a good job or get married and have children. Yeah, so that's pretty lucky.
Yeah, and I'm a generation under yours. Both, my parents were kind of part of that first wave of people who are looking for a different way to do things. My dad was in a men's group my entire life. I thought that was normal. Didn't realize for a while it wasn't. And and my mom had been a nun actually for like 6 years before running away with a priest.
No.
Who was not my father, but and she ended up, moving to like a householder life. And
wish I had a mom that ran away with a priest.
Yeah, it's a pretty great story. So there was a certain way that thinking outside of the cultural norms was pretty normal in my family. But neither of my parents had really looked to many of the Eastern traditions. That was something that kind of that I found myself. So definitely that foundation of like, oh, maybe there's another way to show up here, or another way to interface with the world was very much from them. But it was kind of my own path of figuring out what worked for me in that way. And so I started to study with a shaman, and very early on, she suggested that I start practicing yoga. And at that time, yoga was not a thing like it is now. In fact, she recommended a VHS for me. And I went and got it. I can't remember where I found it even, but I managed to get my hands on this VHS, and this was in 1997 or 8, and I just really clicked right away. Within about a month, I had decided that I would undertake a daily practice of doing these asanas, and they were very, very simple. It was like a warrior pose, and then you kind of rest on a chair, and then, like maybe a
Mm,
down dog, and then you rest. It was like
mm,
very slow. And I just felt like it was a real remembering for me. And it was something that I did very privately. I'd roll out of bed every morning in my pajamas, my glasses, and do this practice. And I, I did that for almost 10 years before I took a class.
really? Wow.
Yeah, it was just this thing I did, and it became very normal to me as like part of my routine to just take care of myself.
Mm.
And
Some tragedy happened though in
yeah,
that period, right, for
well,
you?
that's what was really kind of remarkable about me getting such an early start is then um, only a few years later, my mother passed away very suddenly,
Mm,
and there were a few other family losses, a few cousins of mine who died tragically, and um, I moved to New York City after finishing school the week before 9/11, and
mm.
literally watched the towers go down outside my window.
No.
So there was just a really kind of dramatic period of time in my life where I lost a lot. Um, I mean, I had started with a lot. I come from, a very privileged, educated position in our society, um, but there were some pretty tremendous hits for me, family wise, and like, um, I think that if I hadn't had the foundation of already some years of daily practice and kind of establishing just like a relationship with myself, of like getting on the mat every day and like learning that, okay, I'm a little different every day, but I can still kind of be here and breathe. Um, that was huge to have during such a tumultuous time, and a time when I was like shedding a lot of kind of layers of identity. And I could see right away that without that toolkit, I just wouldn't have been able to handle it in an open way at all. And I see that now. I see a lot of people encountering trauma, and it's just too much, and so they just have to shut down. They
Mm,
go to whatever the mechanisms are that help them, check out and be able to handle it. And I just felt really, I don't know what gave me the motivation from such a young age. I mean, I was 18 when I started that daily practice,
mm,
but it was a really big tool that I leaned into very heavily for a long time. And then, some slowly it kind of opened up for me where I just learned more and more and got more books. And there came a point in time when I started studying full time with a teacher, Dharma Mitra, who's a classical yoga teacher, and um, was introduced to chanting and Krishna Das. But that all came about maybe 8 years into daily practice for me. So um, then a lot kind of like opened up, and I had never even considered like being a teacher or anything. It was just this thing I did for myself, and it kept me sane, and it kept me I mean, a lot of it also was like I learned how to be in my own body and be okay with what was happening in my body and my mind, without just always like pushing back and hating myself like
mm,
we all do.
mm,
So yeah, so that's a little bit of my journey with it, and I've really been quite lucky to encounter some amazing teachers. Like I studied with Dharma very intensely, and then Krishna Das has been uh, um, my ex-husband made the documentary film about him, One Track Heart, and during that time of filming, we became very close with KD and his family, and and I went on to work for Krishna Das for maybe 6-7 years, and that was like a real time of me learning all there is to learn about that practice and world and being in that community, and then eventually I got shifted over to Sharon, Salzberg, and similar things. So so I've had a lot of blessings in that way to have pretty tremendous exposure.
So next thing is, obviously through chanting and so on, you were introduced to what mantra is, the power of it, and the efficacy of it. So, which of course led you to put this book together last year, I think. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about the definition of what that is. And I know in the book you say, I'd never have thought of doing something as simple as or weird as reciting words in another language, and that it could have such a profound effect on my life, and they did. Yeah, let's talk about that and how you encountered that and how that became real for you.
Yeah. Well, my first exposure, someone gave me a CD of Krishna Das's, and that was the first time that I heard Sanskrit mantras. And I listened to the recording a little bit. It's the one album of his that's not call and response, it's longer prayers. And I liked it like some, like I was a musician, so I sort of was used to listening to, I put that in the category of world music because that was
Door of Faith.
Yeah. And beautifully done, produced by Rick Rubin and incredible. And then the same friend invited me to what I thought was a concert at a church on the Upper West Side. This was probably in maybe 2003, something like that. And so I went to this concert, and he comes out and he's like sitting on the floor, so that's like a little different. And then he's says hi, and then he ohms, and I was so shocked that the entire room full of 1,000 people or whatever joined him in making this sound. And at this point, I'd not gone to a yoga class before, so I'd had like a little exposure to some of the names with like the yoga postures, the asanas, but I hadn't heard it at all in this context. And I just like spontaneously wept in that moment when I heard the whole room om. It was this really cathartic experience for me. And it took me years to understand that. It took me years to really kind of come around to it. And I was really resistant to it actually for quite some time. I think in part because I just didn't understand the draw. And at that point in time, like, you couldn't just like get on Google, be like, what's a mantra? Like, this was like 2003. There was some stuff about it, but not a lot, even at that point in time. And so it was really when I started studying with Dharma Mitra, he gave me a context for what it was, because he taught classical yoga and the 8 limbs of yoga, and meditation and pranayama and relaxation. They were all in there, and that was where I kind of understood, like, oh, what are these words? And
but wait, let's go back, because when that om happened in that church with Krishna Das, and 1,000 people resonating with it, and it hit you in the core of you, right? So, but then you're saying you still didn't kind of catch on to what it was. So it just pointing this out. Well, go ahead.
Yeah, because like I didn't know what to do with it, and there was no like avenue for me to really explore it. Like I just went to this concert.
Just keep
Yeah, but this is one of the things that's really interesting is I think there because of the nature of a lot of kirtan, and we'll get to defining kirtan soon, but when you sing mantras, is it's kind of disguised as music. And I think there's quite a gap for people to understand, well, this isn't just regular music, this is something else, and to figure out how to actually work with that. So it really wasn't until my teacher like sort of broke it down for me of like, oh no, you just sing the thing. But it took me that really literal instruction to understand
Mm,
like, oh, I can ohm. Like it's that simple because um I think I had some preconceived notions of like, oh, this has to be this like really complicated thing, and I got to do this and that, and that's what practice is.
yeah,
I
yeah.
just had no context, and even though I'd been doing asana for years, I had no teacher. Like I just was like in the dark, kind of.
Mm, yeah,
So
yeah.
it really took that structure
Hmm.
from Dharma, and then I was like, oh, there's a whole world here. And in classical yoga, it's just one of the many paths to reach ultimately the same place.
Mm,
So whether you're doing a path of devotion or a path of service or a path of study, um, it's said it's kind of just different roads leading to the same place. So that
yeah.
made sense to me.
Hmm. This reminds me of something, actually, how you're describing this, and how you got this contextualization of mantra
Hmm.
through Dharma Mitra, and and that you needed it
Yeah.
to move forward. Well, I don't. You probably remember this, but Ram Dass talks about this. Actually, probably in the movie Becoming Nobody, he talks about
Good
saying
movie.
to. He talks about going to Maharaji and say, "Okay, how 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 should I raise my Kundalini?" And Maharaji, love everyone. And Ram Dass goes, "Okay, that's a wacky thing.
Great. Thank you so much.
All my friends are like meditating like
Yeah.
40 hours a day."
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
just give me something of substance. And then
Hmm.
he said, "So how can I get enlightened and feed people?"
Hmm.
These, and Ram Dass finally understood that he absolutely, well, in this case, was missing the point of,
Hmm.
and that's how Maharaji taught us so much about this is doing for you. This is just more me land.
Yeah.
How can I get
Yeah.
further ahead? This is the Western
Hmm.
concept.
Hmm.
And now, in this particular case, for you to want more contextualization around it, that was to me, that's part of your karmic path to be able to absorb it in that way. And I have a good example of this that we can talk about later when we get to Maha Mantra.
Hmm.
Uh, but uh, but it just points to a reality that that's why it's so rich. This tradition is so
Hmm.
rich, and we all have a different way of approaching it. And so, in this way, well, look what's happened. You got this lovely book, by the way. Here's the book.
Well, and I think for some people it's a big leap to cross to a lineage that's from an entirely different culture.
Yeah.
And for me, it's been a real process to just kind of wade through like what is just Hindu culture, what are the leftovers of just the context of a lineage that came down through thousands of years in a very specific um, geography and the culture that surrounded it, and all of the ways that that would inform these practices. Because most of these were practices for renunciates, for people who were the kind of the outcasts, the unhealthy. Those are the people who would go and do practice, whereas householders had a kind of a different thing going on. And all of that took me a long time to just kind of dig through and understand, so I could pick out like, well, what's the real essence in these? What's the teaching that's more universal, that's more accessible, that
Mm.
isn't just about, compounding more meanness. And that's a real translation process. And I know, like, for me, there was a lot more available resource-wise than when you were in a journey of seeking, when it was like, oh, there was 2 books available. And now, compared to when I was in that early stage of my exploring, it's way more accessible. And I think there has been so much more translation that just really kind of breaks down, like, what you can just do in simple steps. That doesn't mean like you're adopting an entire religion or you have to dress a certain way or whatever. And I've certainly seen that. Like, I've seen the same thing in the Buddhist oligarchy, as I always call it,
Mm-hmm.
with Sharon and Joseph
Mm.
and Jack. That was a real translation process for them to go to the East, to immerse themselves in these teachings, come back and figure out how that interfaces with Western culture and the Western mind, even
Yeah.
just the languaging of how to teach and the stories they would use.
Yeah.
So, and that, I think, it was innate in your process. And now you see, like, it's just such a different time. But you guys had to really, like, you guys were like cutting the path for the rest of us Westerners to
Mm.
follow. And it's interesting that a lot of people now, of course, are drawn to these practices who aren't into India necessarily. And that's great, because you just find what works. And
They're singing 40 verses in praise of the monkey god Hanuman. 40 verses in Hindi, some dialect of Hindi,
Yep.
that they're learning off by heart. It's insane, really.
No.
How about talking a little bit about, okay, let's talk about mantra. What does it mean?
Yeah.
Just because there's a great phrase you use, I'll let you say it in this book about what its efficacy is.
Yeah. I think the simplest definition, and actually I really struggled a lot with the core definition of it,
Oh,
because
yeah?
it's kind of mystical and mysterious, actually. Because so I most readily call it a sacred syllable. But when I'm teaching, like, workshops and things like that, um, I almost like to define it as posing a question, because the idea about what a mantra is that it is like a sound that contains within it. It's like a doorway to a different state of consciousness. Um, it opens something in us and awakens something in us when we say the sound or when we hear the sound. So, just the fact that that exists, and in the Hindu culture that surrounds, the mantras that we're talking about, that are, Sanskrit, um, it's thought that they were actually sounds that were dreamt up by these great rishis, the dreamers who dreamt the world into existence. So very mystical. But when I'm just talking to somebody who, like, walked in off the street to a workshop, I can't exactly say that, because, like, that makes no sense. Like, what is that? What is that? But the idea is that, like, there's certain words that generate certain states that have more juice in them, more power in them. So, and I think on a really basic level, there's some interesting examples of that in our culture, that, different words evoke different things. And language is so fascinating in that way.
Mm.
But Om is thought to be the actual sound of creation itself. It's thought to be the original mantra. That it's like the humming of creation itself, that all of life emerged from it.
Yeah.
So there's some really beautiful mythology around all of these mantras. And honestly, the first maybe 4 years that I started practicing, I didn't want to know what any of it meant, but they made me feel better. So I would do Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, and it would change my state of mind. And I had an experience, and I didn't want to know the mythology. And slowly over time, I opened to it. And of course, now I'm like real into it. I'm like all the way in. So that's a long answer to your question.
But it left out what I loved, which
Yes.
which is the more literal definition, right?
Yeah. The crossing over of the mind.
Crossing over the mind. I love that. I never really heard that before.
Yeah. So, that's man and tra. And so that definition of mantra, the word itself, is basically pointing to the mechanism of moving past just, the limited sense of self, the mind or the ego structure. That's really what that's referring to. So that's a big definition, actually. And for that's why I answer this question differently for different people, because for somebody who's like just getting started exploring things, like I think that there's a way that makes sense and also doesn't make any sense, because we're so bound in shape and form and have no sense that there might be more than just, this is my hand and these are my feelings. But for someone who has been seeking on the path for some time, there's a pretty expansive sense of what am I, and what is consciousness, and all of that is the context for what now is something that's very normal to you and I, which is like all of these practices that help us work with the construct of the mind to access a much broader connection to life itself, a much broader definition of life itself, and a totally different definition of who we even are and what is possible with our time here. So crossing over the mind is a big thing. It is
very big thing.
It's the path and it's the goal, beautifully. And so that's what's cool about mantras, is like, they're cool and they make you feel good, and you can go all the way with them.
And the other thing that you point out here is many people, and you point out a couple, Herbert Benson being one of them, have done a lot of experimentation using functional MRI stuff that Richie Davidson's been doing with all of our friends out there, Danny Goldman, and of course His Holiness is a big supporter of proving this stuff out, what they've known for eons. And so the reality is, I think it was Herbert Benson who talked about the relaxation response that happens with people who are doing repetition of mantras. So just everybody out there, this practice is a proven commodity. If you think that if you need some kind of backup here, that of science to say this really works. But I myself prefer what happened to Lily when she sat down in that church with Krishna and everybody started oming, and it directly, that kind of direct effect. I have seen that happen a gazillion times with people,
of course,
and know it to be extraordinarily effective. And then, as you go along, you start to either investigate it further like you did, but it took you years to even want to do that because it just felt good. So you can just start there. You don't have to go further than that. If it needs to, it will take you. You don't take it. It takes you, similarly to the idea of a guru. So, that's important.
And there's a whole chapter in the book about the scientific research around this, which was some of which, I'd known about for some time. And then I really dug into the to research when I was working on the book, and found some things that were really astonishing, like around epigenetics, that, that mantras not only change, physiologically change things for you, but they also activate or deactivate certain aspects of the DNA, and that's passed on to your children. I mean, that's crazy. My best friend is Krishna Das's daughter, and I always joke with her, see, you're fine because your dad did all that practice. You got it through the DNA. But it is really exciting to see kind of what's being shown there. I think especially for people who, are, like, I've always been a little skeptical, especially if someone doesn't have that big experience in the church, like maybe they don't have someone who invites them to a Krishnadas kirtan, but they're looking for a way to work with their mental health or insomnia, or, work with a trauma, cancer diagnosis, whatever it might be. And I think the research is giving a really nice entry point for people to just be more open to it. And
I like one of the things that you point out in terms of different efficacies of the practice, lower blood pressure, etc., stuff like that. Decreased self-referencing, which is my favorite subject in the entire world.
Hallelujah.
Anything that's going to do that is a boon for each one of us, because that's all we do all day long is self-referencing.
So, or what KD has coined as the movie of me.
Yes, the movie
of me, and then the reviews we write about the movie of me. So it's not enough that we're like doing the self-referencing, then we're going to give ourselves shit about it.
Right.
We'll feel real shitty and then be ashamed of it.
Yeah, it's good stuff. So, and so this is like, so mantra is actually like, it's like taking a pitchfork, right, and just jamming it. It jams in and opens up enough space so that you can be aware.
It's quite an image. It interrupts the cycle.
That's what I mean.
It is like a softer way to put that, I'm going to say. But sometimes we do need like a serious interruption.
I need a pitchfork. Okay.
Yeah. Some people need a pitchfork. Some people, but it's, and it's lovely because I think it does kind of sneak up on people, whether, now there are a lot of places to hear mantra, but it doesn't have to be like a big fancy thing. And like, it doesn't actually take a lot for that pitchfork to come in. And I've seen it with a lot of people who, for a long time I ran and owned a yoga center in Brooklyn, and which was primarily a yoga classes, but we had this really remarkable kirtan program that every Friday we would do these events. And it was maybe 4 or 5 of us who would rotate leading the kirtans. A lot of people like Nina Rao, who you know and love, and Ambika Pressman, Shama Chapin, David Das, Jeremy, just a whole grouping of us. And to see over a period of about 10 years, people who would come into that experience and kind of how people would connect with it was really amazing to see, just from the point of view of me, who was a practitioner, but just to understand like what happens when people encounter this as a practice, when they like really open into mantra. And people that I knew for that whole period of time who would, like, there's a few people who would come every Friday, literally every Friday for years and years and years and years. It was kind of their mainstay. And to see how the mantra practice opened their lives, changed their self-view, changed the way that self-referencing was, like the death grip of it would get softer. The patience and like inherent compassion that would kind of come to life in them just by coming and singing for a couple hours.
Yeah.
Which in the moment was just like, yeah, it feels good. But all these benefits would kind of sneak up on them. It was so fun to see. Just like,
yeah, absolutely. Even today, and I've been doing this a long time.
you're like
This stuff.
8,000 years old.
Yeah,
Amazing. You look so good.
I know. Thank you. Even the way that it just sticks in you, it's just like AM radio used to be for us. Well, they'd play a pop song and they'd repeat it so much and the chorus would stick in your brain.
Oh,
Right?
on a loop.
Right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That happens with mantra, especially kirtan, which is mantra that is sung rather than repeated. And by the way, those are just so everybody knows, there's it's called in Hindi, japa, which is speaking mantra aloud or silently, ram, 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 or
Yeah,
using
that's what's usually done
there's a
like with one
beat,
of the rosaries.
yeah.
Yeah.
Or like Maharaj used to just do it on his ram, 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 like that. Or it's kirtan, which is singing, like anybody who knows about Krishna. And if you don't, write me, I'll send you a song. And then there's writing
The written
mantras,
form.
which
Yeah.
Maharaji used to do. He used to
That's
put
right.
it in only while we were with him. How about that? That's crazy.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know
It was
that.
only from 70 to 73 when all the Westerners were with him. He kept a diary of Ram Ram. So so there's an interesting thing in my mind that goes on around the singing of mantras, kirtan, chanting, is the efficacy of it is enormous. One of the reasons is, and you mentioned this before, as the music is the sugar by which the vibration and power of the actual mantra can get through. So you don't have to think about it. You don't have to do anything. It just is. It just is. And so, especially here in the West, and because of a lot of it, because of Krishnas and Jai Uttal, I would say, Bhagwan Das in the very beginning, the beauty of us expressing ourselves through music using the mantra is really something to think about over all these years. And the way in which so many people can gravitate it for, because the chord changes are more Western, the Krishnadas use Jai, maybe a little bit more traditional. But this is a very, very powerful way for people to enter into this practice.
Yeah.
But it comes with a little bit of, that you point out, it comes with a little bit of, you got to watch out a little bit. Now, what's happened, and Lily knows me enough to know how much, let's say I have very Catholic tastes around kirtan and look askance at many of us that are doing it. And that's just my little curmudgeon-y thing. But there is a way in which the lesson is, and you point this out in the book, this is not about entertainment. This is about practice.
Yeah.
And, unfortunately, at times we get a little involved in the entertainment part because that's how we grew up. We grew up wanting to be in rock and roll bands and, folk singing and all of that kind of a thing. So it's something to notice.
Yeah.
I don't, I'll tell you a story. When I was with Maharaji in India, once we were in Allahabad, and I was in a rickshaw with a friend of mine, Balaram Das, who took many of the great pictures of Maharaji.
Who lives like a mile from me now.
He lives a mile from me, yeah. There used to be a movie at the time, I can't remember, Dum Mara Dum. Basically, it was a jive about Westerners who smoked pot, or charas or hash, and they would go dum mara dum Hari, and they'd make that sign.
Yeah.
Hare Krishna, Hare Ram, you idiot hippies, get out of here, At least that was what they did that to
Nice.
we went by a movie theater where it was playing, and a bunch of young guys came out, hey, you hippies, dumb, and I went, what the, like that. Balaram turned to me and went, what are you talking about? It's the name. It doesn't matter. It is still the name,
Nice.
It is still the name.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to remember that our training in the West is that our whole culture teaches us that we will be happy if we are beautiful, if we are successful, if we are pleasant, if we sound good, if we look good, if we stay young. That's what we're taught. So, of course, when we encounter any practice, we're going to bring all that baggage along with us because some part of us has been taught this is what's going to get me happy. That's what we're looking for. So, yes, when you walk into a room, and because the kirtan is call and response, so the leader first sings the mantra and then everyone else in the room sings it back. And I see it every time. The first time you're like, okay, sing it back. And everyone's like, oh, because the first thing that happens is that conditioning is like, I have to sound a certain way in order for this to work. So right away, we're cutting through that conditioning and looking through a different mechanism that says, actually, maybe that doesn't work. Maybe there's another way. So you have to kind of put down the conditioning long enough to try it. And what's really fun about spending time in India, and you guys have so many amazing stories of this, is that when you encounter somebody who's singing kirtan, or there's also bhajans, these like longer kind of love songs, they're not good singers, like at all. But the most amazing ones, like our beloved KK, who most of your listeners know about, there was so much coming through it. It didn't matter if sonically it was masterful, or that they were a well-trained vocalist, or that they played the instrument beautifully. The feeling, the bhav, of like the calling out that was happening, like that would transcend everything. But for Westerners, you have to kind of give a little permission. Say like, okay, we got to put this idea down that this is Celine Dion, like that being Celine Dion is going to get you to the goal. You have to put that down and then just get comfortable just singing. Like, let's just sing. It's okay. You can sound like shit, and it's not about that. It's really about what you bring to it. And of course, the deeper mechanism here is that we really are training the mind by gathering our attention into the anchor of the practice, which is the mantra. And that mechanism is the same as with meditation practice or asana practice. And so it's using the mantra as a vehicle to gather ourselves, to move from this like fragmented place. And that's that feeling when you hear someone like KD or Jai, who like some transmission is happening, because they've brought everything into the mantra in that moment. It's like that's all that exists, and that's why it becomes this pathway for a whole other way of being, right? Because what happens if we show up all the way, if we're not 18 places at once? But yeah, people, and as the yoga industry became a thing in the West, and a lot of people started doing practice that was pretty divorced from the broader philosophy or context, and a lot of musicians started doing sort of integrating these like spiritual things. Oh my God. I'm a real hater. I mean, I lived in New York for like 20 years. I love everyone, but I don't like them necessarily. Let's put it that way.
Okay, I like that.
But I'll be kind. I will be kind. But yeah, so there's a lot of people who started, doing mantras and had really kind of no understanding of what it was, which that's cool. It's like what your friend said. It's like it's the name, and I think that in any context, it's going to do something. Like a seed is going to get planted, and over time, maybe many lifetimes, it's going to start to sprout something.
And I think aside from the reality of that this is a practice, is no more or less, it's a meditation, because you're using that, as you said, an anchor of the mantra. And when you realize that you're lost in thought, you come back to it. We have our wonderful teacher, Sharon Salzberg, who has emphasized that the beauty of the human condition is we can always come back. We can come back to the breath. We can come back to the mantra. We can back to our true selves. And when we see, our wacky motivations that are on a day-to-day basis. So, but the other thing that's there is, and you mentioned this as well, is the emotional expression that comes from a heart when there's a certain melodic structure that's just, the beauty of the Indian thing is the ragas they have, and so many different melodic structures that allow for like longing, that open up a heart. And that with the mantra and the music, it's just a spectacular way of transcending, the little mini me stuff that we are in a daily war with, so that's why it's beautiful in both those ways.
I think it is very potent because of that. And I was a musician for the first decade that I lived in New York. I moved there to pursue music, and so music for me has always been a very healing vessel. And so the combination of the two I find to be very powerful. And I myself have had a lot of experiences where, just it does feel like the power of the music takes me somewhere. I mean, we've all had those big moments where we're in some concert and, your favorite song comes on and it just like changes every molecule in your body. Like it's a very and there's a whole world that explores the way different sound and frequencies do different things in the body and all of that, which is another conversation. But to take those ingredients and combine them with mantra, I think is like a double-edged tool for us that just is so much more effective, because the beauty of the music has a way of pulling you back to, some people just have a lot of difficulty doing like breath meditation because it just feels too dry to them, too kind of divorced. They need something that's a little juicier. And so singing mantra can be really great. And I've also, I've done a lot. My teacher Dharma was he started me drawing ohms for years. And that is a very lovely embodied practice because it's like the physicality of writing out a mantra. It's so soothing. And, there's people who spend a lifetime learning how to write Sanskrit as a spiritual path.
As a practice,
So,
the other great thing, people, in this book is there are all of the main mantras that many of us have been doing for all these years. For instance, the Gayatri mantra. Deva Premal, by the way, Deva Premal did that. I think it's her. For Battlestar Galactica is the opening theme.
That makes
Did you
me
know
so
that?
happy. No.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah,
I mean, that's one of the great television shows that ever was. It's like this long series. And then every time it comes on, you hear, that angelic voice and this beautiful mantra, so.
Well, I'm going to have to go watch that tonight.
Yeah, you have to. Oh, you haven't seen Battlestar Galactica? Are you kidding? It's unbelievable.
Well, I'm watching Picard right now.
Oh,
I'm really
okay.
into Star Trek. I'm really into sci-fi. I mean,
oh, okay. Well, then you will love this.
Yeah.
And also, of course, Maha mantra.
Yeah.
right? Which is the Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Now
Yeah.
that has been espoused, of course, by the Hare Krishna people that we know of, the people
The
in the
ISKCON.
airports, but they're no longer in the airports for some reason. I'm not quite sure. And there is a, a serious, I mean, they're the first people I ever heard a mantra was me going. We used to go there to eat because the food was on Sunday morning. It was fantastic.
Oh,
This
yeah.
was in Montreal where I live.
Uh-huh.
And then we heard the mantra. Actually,
Yeah.
where did I hear it first? No, I heard it first from Allen Ginsberg. Allen Ginsberg had this little squeeze box harmonium thing, and he
So
could talk
good.
about somebody who couldn't sing in tune whatsoever.
Yeah.
And he would do this, but with such joy.
Mhm.
He was so great. And I heard that and I went, oh God, yeah, that
Mhm.
sounds cool, And then, okay, so of course I went to India, and of course that's the main practice that we brought back, that came back with us, exemplified by Jai and Krishna Das and Bhagavan Das back then. And so it's been that alongside of, for me, meditation, thank God for Sharon, Jack, and Joseph. Well,
Yeah.
we met Goenka in India back then in Munindra. And the combination of, and as I know it's your favorite practice as well, is extraordinary.
Yeah.
Then one day, a friend of mine invited me to a convocation of the Hare Krishna people when I lived in North Carolina, in this incredible ashram in Boone, North Carolina. And every year, actually around Memorial Day, they all get together, a huge hall. I mean, there's a couple of thousand people, and they have like lots of rooms and big kitchen. It's just an amazing place. He said, you got to come. And I go, are you kidding? I don't want to come to the Hare Krishna thing. Are you nuts? He said, listen, yeah, I know you, and you got to come. I said, okay, and just meet up with me. So I went. And it's where I met this one particular Hare Krishna chanter, who is, as far as I'm concerned, one of the, if not the best, one of them, Madhava Prabhu, who comes up with just extraordinarily simple, heart-opening melodies and so on. And he was there, and I got blown away by the reality. In the end, which is what they say, there's only one thing to do. You just do this mantra. There's nothing else to do. This is the only thing that will take you from the shore of ignorance to the shore of enlightenment, is just do this mantra, which I always hated, the way they were so fundamental about all that.
Yeah.
In the end, I was about to get in the line where you get your hair cut and you just have a top notch and become a Hare Krishna guy. I was going to do it because I realized you're right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
I'm kidding in one way, but in another way, the efficacy of it is extraordinary. And if you go do it, because they were doing it 24/7, over these 5 days or whatever it was. And you guys, I've been only once or twice in New York when do the New Year's thing with the
The 12
repetition,
hours.
of the Hanuman Chalisa. These things will, if you can find anywhere, and you can, if you go out to the Taos ashram, Nimkaroli Baba Hanuman ashram in Taos, where they have a lot of these 24-hour kirtans, recitations, you will see undoubtedly the efficacy of the mantra. George, you have this beautiful quote from George: of all mantras, the Maha mantra has been prescribed as the easiest and surest way for attaining God realization in this present age. I love
You have
George.
to tell him George who.
George Harrison. There's only one George. It's not George Bush. Okay.
Well, and I was just at your house, and you were playing this new video of George singing.
Yeah,
The mantra
that we found out of the
we had
blue.
just found,
It
because
was
of course on
so,
all things shall pass, there's some really beautiful mantra.
yeah.
But well, and before you asked me about kind of how mantra practice, how I've found it when talking about efficacy as compared to these other practices, and as somebody who originally came that training I had for years with Dharma was really a well-rounded path, and that mantra practice was one aspect of. And for many years, for maybe 5 or 6 years, my daily practice was a really big mix. It was physical postures, it was breathing practices, meditation, mantra, and then service. But I had some pretty intense health problems. Um, that kind of happened smack in the middle of like the height of the success of my yoga center, and I was teaching a lot, and I started to have some really massive issues with my spine. And it took many years to kind of figure out that I had this whole anomaly in my spine. And through the course of that period of time, I went from being essentially like a professional athlete that could do anything with my body. I had like practiced so much, and um, was teaching like 25 classes a week, to ultimately being stuck in bed on bed rest for about a year's time,
Mm.
and being, like unable to like get to the bathroom myself at a young, in my mid 30s. And so that was a really huge experience that came after many years of practice and many years of training, and a lot of time teaching too, and a time when I felt like I was pretty solid in things, right?
Mm.
And then kind of out of nowhere, I really got the shit kicked out of me. And it took a long time for me to even know what was going on, because this was such a it's basically like a birth defect that I have in my spine. And so through that period of time, as my condition got worse and my pain got worse, and I became, less functional of a person, those practices that had been my mainstay for so long, I stopped being able to do all of them. Like I couldn't even move my body. And the one thing that I could still do was mantra
Mm.
practice.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was a really, horrendous experience, let's be honest. But it was very fascinating to me that mantras still uh, helped me somehow. And it wasn't like they fixed everything, because, I had years of really, you know, horrendous pain, and it took me a really long time to build back to where I was like a functional, independent person again, let alone teaching or anything like that. But the practice gave me an outlet to just stay connected with myself during that period of
Yeah.
time, which
Yep.
I think, like, for a lot of us, we have very lofty ideas of what it means to get enlightened in this life, like the Hare Krishna people were saying, or like, oh, all my problems will be gone, or oh, I'm just going to be happy all the time. It's going to like constant ice cream, amazing. And it is just not really like that. It, like, we're still people, we're still in the body, we still encounter, what's coming down the pipeline for us. And there are a lot of things that we encounter that are not easy, that are not fair. But having the mantra practice, like, it gave me a way um, to cope, really,
Mm.
and
Mm.
to not just be afraid all the time.
Yeah.
Because you go through something like that and are really faced with how little control we have over our lives, and it's deeply frightening, because like so much of the time we're just like we're managing
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. That's, yeah.
So
It's very great to have you, no matter what. You might even not have, like, if you're, let's say, ill. I bet at that time when you're in bed, it might have been even hard to do any kind of meditative practice,
oh
following the
man,
breath, because of the distraction. But
yeah,
you always had that mantra available
that's right,
to repeat.
that's
And
right.
it's like as they say in India, it's a boat that takes you
Yeah,
over
and
the shore of
you hang
ignorance.
on to it for dear
Yeah,
life.
hang on. Yeah,
It is the lifeline.
yeah.
So
So
that was really helpful for me, and to understand. I think that different practices have different purposes, really, and that, for those of us who have the privilege of being really healthy, either physically or mentally, like, yeah, we have access to certain practices that somebody else just can't do. Like, if you've encountered a lot of trauma in your life, mindfulness is not going to help you. It's actually going to make your trauma worse. But certain other practices are very effective for you.
yeah,
And, now that we have access to so many options, I think it's the much higher chance of somebody finding something that is really helpful, um, and can take them through, whatever they're facing
yeah,
in life in a
yeah,
way that's better, that's, yeah, less afraid, more connected, and even, like, it won't fix everything, but we don't have to be so isolated from ourselves, from others. We can connect to something a little bigger than
yeah,
ourselves, and that's a big deal.
yeah. So to summarize this chat is to say, we'll put in the show notes all of the different Hare Krishna addresses that you can go down there and sign up. And okay,
Awesome. Yeah, and
it's
and
such
the
it's a dichotomy. Okay,
so
folks, it
yeah,
really is. I mean, because it's so real,
yeah,
and then but we as humans distort stuff a little bit, I would say,
of course.
and that's just part of the process. But
Yeah,
the power of mantra
yeah,
is self-evident when you even just as Lily did. She went into the church and they started oming, and she started oming, and that was the beginning of
yeah.
the next part of her life, right? Really.
Yeah, and the publisher of the book, approached me and asked me to write this book for them. It wasn't something I was, like,
Mm,
planning on doing,
hmm.
but I really loved the idea, and especially because even in, like, the Ram Dass community or people who chant with Krishna Das, I know just a lot of folks don't have a home practice or a regular practice, and that the only way they feel like they can access these things is by going to a retreat or to an event, and that's great if you can do that, but it is something that is very easy to kind of take up for yourself. So the book is really like a handbook, and half of it is a breakdown of 13 different
Mantras,
mantras,
yeah,
the meaning, and it's meant to just, like, empower you to do the practice,
yeah.
even if it's just something you do for 5 minutes a day.
Well, you know what? We're gonna use it for our fellowship program.
Awesome.
We're gonna get a whole pile of them and get them out there,
Great.
because it'll be really useful for people, because people want to know what this is and how to
Yeah.
approach it and so on. So I'm really happy that you were here to talk about it, Lily.
Good.
Really
Yeah.
great. And again, all in the show notes, there's links to everything, and
Yeah.
particularly the book, which is something. And
Yeah.
I like the way it's in a small format. You can easily take it around with you, and if
Totally.
it's got the mantras there,
It's a
so
great
it's
little
really
chart.
great.
And
Yeah.
there's a whole companion that goes with it too, that's like a pronunciation guide.
Mm,
There's some call and response mantras that you can download, and also written guides so you can learn how to
hmm.
write them.
Right.
So it's a real good toolkit.
Yeah, and a lot of references as well.
Yeah.
So that's great.
Yeah. Thanks
Thank
so
you,
much for
Lily.
having me.
Great
Yeah.
to have you.
So good.
And so this is Mind Rolling on Be Here Now Network. Go to BeHereNowNetwork.com. And you can also listen to Sharon Salzberg, who is
Dun-dun-dun.
Lily's
She's my
boss.
boss. She's my boss.
Yeah, we couldn't have a better boss than that, I don't think.
Yeah.
And many others
Yeah.
to help get a life in balance. See
Life
you
and
next week,
balance.
everyone.